Hey guys, welcome back to another video. If you're new around here, my name is Sebastian, and today we're going to be talking about what's inside this bag. Welcome to my tiny desk review. So today I'm reviewing the Panasonic G7. I have used this camera for about 3 years now. I bought it back in 2017. During those 3 years, I've used this camera for family photos, videos, YouTube videos, and just casual shooting with it. During the course of that time, I have developed some opinions about this camera. In short, this camera is great depending on your skill level and what you plan to use it for. So just going to quickly run through the specs here. If you want more in-depth information on these specs, you can look it up on their website, or there are plenty of other videos that just go over specs on this camera. This camera uses a 16 megapixel sensor. It is a micro four thirds camera, $500 with the kit lens. It shoots in 4K 30, 1080 60, 1080 30, 720 60, and 30. Maximum bitrate is 100 and records either MP4 or AVC. It takes RAW photos and JPEGs. It can also take both simultaneously. This camera comes with a 1200 megahertz battery. It'll last roughly about 250 to 300 shots. Recording time anywhere from 1 to 2 hours roughly. You could probably stretch it depending on how you use the camera, whether or not you're using the display or not, how long you have it set to sleep, and how frequently, how long it's running continuously. It also has a mini HDMI, a remote shutter, microphone jack, and roughly 5 function buttons and a pop-up flash. It also features a flip-out screen, completely rotatable. So with my reviews, I like keeping it short and simple. I only seek to answer 2 questions. Is it worth it, and do I recommend it? How I usually do that is by weighing out the pros and the cons. So let's begin with what's good about this camera. The first one I want to talk about is the ergonomics. The ergonomics on this camera are great. I would even say it's better than the current camera I'm using now, the Sony a7 III. This camera, you can fully fit all 4 fingers, although my hands aren't super big. Fits all of my fingers on here just fine, and I can hit the shutter and access all the other buttons and feel comfortable even holding it with just these fingers here. I can't say the same about my current camera that I'm using. These are the things I like in a camera grip. It makes it comfortable and it makes it easier to hold for longer periods of time. After ergonomics comes weight. This camera is light. Compared to the camera I'm shooting this on now, it feels like a toy. Although it sounds bad, it might not actually be. This is definitely a camera that you can carry around all day and not feel the weight of after a significant amount of time. Although the build quality is not the greatest, it works out in its weight. Everything is all plastic, lenses included. You could buy the more premium lenses for this camera system. They will be made out of metal, but they will be heavier and it would balance it off. One of the drawbacks for having such a light body though is that if you're trying to use this on a gimbal or a stabilizer, it will be harder to stabilize because both the lenses that I have and the body itself are plastic, making this an ultra light camera. I think one of the things it does have going for it is its weight. The video features on this camera are really, really good, especially at this price range. At $500, I don't think there will be anything else that can beat this camera as far as video capabilities go. Compared to, $600-700 cameras, this thing can still hold its own. However, one of the drawbacks is that its autofocusing is not that great. Granted, if you use it in 1080p, full HD, 60 and 30 frames per second, autofocus is not too bad. It is definitely usable. 4K, it is not. You can use the autofocus to set the focus, but you can't count on its continuous autofocus tracking. It is not that good in 4K. It's very slow compared to the 1080. The next thing on our list is the preamps. The preamps are great with this camera. I got this camera with a Rode Video Micro and it sounds great. I can always bring the microphone closer to my mouth and it sounds even better. The next thing, everybody seems to love this flip out screen. Maybe not this one in particular, but just generally a flip out screen in general. Being a solo content creator, having a flip out screen, I admit, is helpful. However, as long as the camera has the capability to connect to my cell phone, I can pretty much do what I need to do without this flip out screen. And especially for these talking headshots, I find that having the articulating screen is actually a bit more distracting versus just looking at the lens itself. I find my eyes looking over to look at myself. Maybe it's because I'm narcissistic, or maybe it's just because there's a bright screen right next to where my eyes should be. So the other thing about this camera that I like is its buttons. Buttons and dials on here are quite tactile. I like the placement. It is very logical and it makes sense. And even for me, this was my first camera. I found that picking this camera up and using it did not take long for me to learn. It definitely is not as difficult as jumping into, say, a Sony camera. The entry-level lenses for this camera are also relatively cheap. So here I have the 25mm 1.7 from Panasonic, and this was $150, brand new. It's the nifty 50 fantastic plastic lens that you can buy for this camera, and it was relatively cheap compared to lenses that you can buy for other systems new. However, there isn't that big of a selection. Once you start looking at the other lenses, they'll quickly climb up in price to, $700, $800, $900, $1,000+ for a lens. This camera also does not overheat. It's even possible to have a unlimited record limit for this camera. You just have to press a few buttons and you can access the cheat code, so to speak. Put this camera in a special mode where it allows you to have unlimited record time. So that being said, those are all the positives that I think come with this camera. Now on to the con list. Things that I don't like about this camera are the fact that this Panasonic specifically does not come with IBIS. So this lens that I got is not stabilized. Although the kit lens is, most of the other lenses that you can buy are not, unless you're willing to pay an astronomical amount of money for them. Although there are plenty of lenses that you can adapt to this camera body, most of them probably won't be stabilized either. So not having IBIS for this camera is kind of a bummer. Also, the stills on this camera, I'm not a big fan of the stills quality for this camera. The stills for this camera, I think, are decent. They are passable. They're not going to blow you out of the water, especially when, like I said earlier, one of the drawbacks is autofocusing and the lack of IBIS. If you're trying to take a lot of portrait photography on here with no IBIS and you're using a non-stabilized lens, you're going to have a few shots that are going to be blurry. The other thing about this camera that I don't like is the low light performance. Granted, it is a micro four thirds camera. It has a smaller sensor. It is going to come with worse low light performance. I highly do not recommend using this camera in almost any low light conditions at all. The battery life on this camera, it's pretty decent. Although I wouldn't say that this battery would last you a whole day's shoot on one battery like these Sony Z batteries would. With a couple spares I can get for like 20 or 30 bucks. And the original battery here, that will definitely last you a whole day. Lastly, for this camera, there is a lack of weather sealing. This is probably the last version of this camera that they made without weather sealing. All the other newer ones do come with weather sealing and IBIS and all of that jazz. However, if you're looking into this camera specifically, you probably can't afford those cameras. So ultimately, for this camera, all of the pros that I've listed, I feel outweigh most of the cons. Therefore, this camera is still worth it. Depending on what kind of user you are, if you are just coming off of your smartphone and you're looking for something better, but you don't want to invest too much money, this camera is for you. If you're looking for a B camera that you're not going to worry too much about, or if you want kind of a beater camera, this is also for you. If you're someone that's seeking features that I've listed that this camera doesn't have, those are probably going to be deal breakers for you. If you're just starting out, this camera will do it all for you, and then some. It will carry you for a few years, but once you start to realize, the limitations on this camera and that it's actually starting to hold you back, it's a good time to look to upgrade. So I'll also include some clips of me just using this camera. Okay, so quick costume change. If you're wondering why I'm wearing something else, it's because I'm recording this now later. But I wanted to show you guys what vlogging with the Panasonic G7 was like. This was kind of my go-to setup back when I first got this. I have it here sitting on an UltraPod Mark II, the camera itself, and then a Rode Video Micro. Unfortunately, I broke the shock mount that came with it, and I was able to find some other mic holder that fits in the hot shoe. This was pretty much it. Okay, so here is the kind of vlogging setup that I have with this camera, and one that I've been using for a long time. So I am currently recording this in 60p, and this will be later on uploaded on a 24p timeline, so it might look a little wacky. Hold on. Yeah, there it is. So The autofocus on this camera is actually not as bad as people say. So long as you're using it in HD, it's not really much of an issue. I actually really liked using this camera for vlogging. The only thing is that its battery life wasn't too great. But the flip out screen is like super duper helpful. But if you're not a vlogger and you're able to do a lot more setup time and you're pretty much behind the camera, you don't really need a flip out screen, in my opinion. It is super helpful, and I'm actually kind of missing it now that I'm looking at it here. Yeah, but let's test that autofocus again. There it is. And then now we're back. Very smooth. I like it. It's not jumpy. It's not quick. But like I said before, this camera is not stabilized, but the kit lens that you get with it, it is stabilized. Not all the other lenses that come with, that you can buy for this system do happen to be stabilized, like the Panasonic 25mm 2.8 here. Let's see if it focuses on that. So this lens is not stabilized, so if you try to handheld this one, it's going to be very shaky unless you have a gimbal, or some other type of stabilizer like a tripod. However, the problem is with the stabilizer, or with the gimbal, the problem with the gimbal is that once you set this on a gimbal, if the camera is not heavy enough, it will actually not balance properly. Even with the motors on the lowest setting, you'll still get some of the jitters. I've tried things such as adding on plates. I found that the only thing that probably would actually work is if you buy some counterweights. With counterweights, then maybe it would be possible for you to balance this G7 on a gimbal. It can be done. Anywho, so this was just kind of the test, using this camera to vlog, so long as you're not trying to vlog in 4K. And like I said before, this camera, it's $500 with this kit lens. It's a really good kit lens. I just wanted to give you guys kind of a quick rundown of what vlogging with this camera would be like. So actually looking at this flip out screen now and how light this system is, I'm actually kind of missing the Panasonic G7. I can hold this out here, no problem. It's not too heavy. I can probably carry this camera around with me all day. Not really a big issue. I'm going to switch back to my A cam here, and we're going to continue talking about this camera. So the final thing that I wanted to touch on about this camera is, although it may have come out, a few years ago, it is still a very strong contender at its price point. I think this camera can definitely act as, a way for you to make money, create content. As of recording this camera is by no means outdated, and I think for $500, it is still a really good value. For $500 on just the kit, the body and the lens alone, you could spend that extra $100 or $2 that you might save. You could spend on having a better microphone, a tripod, more batteries, an ND filter. If you have extra money to spend because of what you saved, then definitely, you can invest in all the extra camera accessories that can help you get further along in video making. So with that being said, this is pretty much my review of the Panasonic G7. Is it still worth it? Yes. Is it a good value? Yes. Would I recommend it? Yes. I hope this video helps. If you guys have any questions, please type a comment down below. I'll try my best to answer all the questions that come through about this camera. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Sebastian. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.